and I'm about to bring my guest up here in just a second. We're going to be talking about a book. Now, I have not done a lot of book reviews live online before, so this is exciting. It's something new. So be patient with us as we try to figure out the best way to do this. We do have a special guest that's supposed to be jumping on with us here this evening, here in about 30 minutes or so, and give her take on it too. It'll be Monica Perez, who's host of the Propaganda Report. But right now, let's just bring in, I've already told her she's going to do all the talking. It's all on her tonight. And she's laughing. How you doing, Alexandra?
Hello, Clint. I am doing fantastic. How are you?
We're here. We're doing it.
That we are. I have one important question to ask you first, though, before we start.
Uh-oh. You didn't tell me about this, but go ahead.
Which cover did you read?
I listened to it. I did the audio. Yeah.
Okay. Because I saw on the picture that you posted before, there's like 20 different variations of the cover of the book. So I was just curious.
Well, me sitting down and reading for hours and hours is kind of a lost art. I used to love to do it, but I have done the listening mode, and I've listened to it twice in the last 30 days. And it took a little time, but I put the headset in and work out or do some typing or writing myself. And I like listening. I got lucky because I got a guy that reads it, and he read it very engaging. He wasn't over dramatic, and so he didn't make me cringe sometimes, because sometimes the reading just isn't right. But I've come to the conclusion about tonight.
Let me hear
There's going to be stuff that we want to say that's just not going to get said.
Is it because for fear of not saying it, or is it just not going to fit into the hour and a half or hour long time?
Yes.
Okay. To both? Yes, to both.
Yes. Well, so let's do this. And I don't mind going first, or you can go first. You've got your list, your kind of outline of your takeaways. I've got my outline and takeaways. The book is 1984, written by George Orwell, whose real name was Eric Blair. I think it was written in 48. It was published in 49. It was one of several books. He was a socialist who ended up hating communism. That's one of the reasons he wrote the books. So we can talk a little bit about his life if anybody wants to. I know a fraction enough to be dangerous. Mm-hmm. But do you want to talk a little bit about, as you read the book, did it mean more to you now than the first time you read it? Because it's been since high school since I've read or listened to this book.
Well, funny thing, I actually had never read it before. I know, right?
What?
I had read Animal Farm.
Yeah.
I actually had to read that for school going, gosh, way, way back. But I had never read 1984. And so it was all kind of on my purview and on my list of things to read. But so jumped in on it in January. And this year I'm trying to do one book a month, maybe two, because I'm kind of like you. I'm getting into the audibles. I'd never listened to books before, and I'm starting to kind of get into that. But in any event, so first time reading it, and oh my, do we see some he was a good fortune teller. Let's just put it that way.
Well, you did something really good. I did it a little bit. I read an article that took 1984 and actually was kind of a counter voice for it. In other words, they wrote on how it doesn't really reflect what's going on in society now and how people from both the left and the right use it to point out stuff on the other side. Because at the end of it, the book is about, complete control of your government. And if you go to either extreme, left or right, you end up at the same place, basically. Mm-hmm. Which is total control of a government.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's always a good thing to do is look at counterpoints. And I did that as well. And, one of the ones in particular that I read, they said to be careful not to misconstrue, a complete totalitarian state like we see in 1984 with what's going on today, because I don't think we're there yet. I think some of the things that we've seen go on in our society over the last 10, 20 years, in particular, what happened with Snowden, releasing the information of the NSA and the Patriot Act and what that is, posed for us as citizens, not having, not feeling, the ability to be able to speak freely without government listening in on things. Like some of those types of things we see happen in 1984, right? To an extreme sense.
Yeah, well, and I think me and you both have a little bit of a fear, not only from the government, but there's something in the book that is extreme, and there's something that's happening now more, I think, more and more. And me and you talked about this before we came on. I think if you were to take pre-book, if you were to have Orwell write a book prior to 1984, we are on the progression line somewhere prior to that. Of course, we couldn't do a show like this if we were under the government's hand like 1984. But
we're not North Korea yet.
Right. Exactly. But we are, I think, way more, we reflect more 1984 than I ever thought we really would. Mm-hmm. Right. There's an article, and I think I wrote it down somewhere. There's an article that I read that's from England, because we forget that the book is not set in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. The book is not about the United States. Mm-hmm. It's about the world. But there is the definition of hate speech, because we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of definition of words. Well, the definition of hate speech in England is a little different than it is here in the United States. As a matter of fact, I may have a screenshot of it because this kind of stuff's important, I think. Let's see here. Yeah, any communication which is threatening or abusive and is intended to harass, alarm, or distress someone is forbidden. Alarm, distress, again, who's in charge of the definitions wins the argument, right?
Very subjective. Mm-hmm.
Very. Well, this was written in November of 2020, and it's by a UK legal firm. There's now proposals or talks to remove the exclusion in your own private conversations in your homes. There's a dwelling exclusion in this hate speech thing. And they're saying now that they are suggesting that we remove the dwelling privacy exemption in order to be criminally prosecuted for what you say at your house. So when you hear things like that and you go, that's silly, that'll never happen. And then you look around at some of the stuff we're going through now, you go, maybe. You never know.
Well, I mean, did the Germans think that was going to happen when 1 in every 4, 1 in every 5 was an informer, a government informer, and people were turning on their family members and, their neighbors left and right, which we're seeing happen today. I mean, one of the points that I had noted was, we see, especially on social media, children turning their parents in, for the children don't necessarily align politically speaking with their parents. Maybe their parents are running for a particular governmental position. And then here you see them. Next thing you know, they're making TikToks about their parents. So,
and I hate to say this, I would have, when you're a 9-year-old, you'll say things and don't understand what consequences are. You'll say things because you're mad at your mom and dad, but all you need is a little crack in the door there. And now you've got government involvement. And I've said that's a sneaky thing that's happening with homeschooling now, because there's a number of articles where you'll have a girl or boy online and there'll be something in the background, or there's something that people don't like. I've seen articles where people have had to take flags down, American flags, or there's been BB guns in the background, and now you get a knock on the door. And it's just, I think we're waking up a little bit to say, okay, we're not 1984, and it would be silly to say we are, right. But also we're way closer to it than we probably would want to be. And I agree with you about the people turning each other in. I think that's a pretty sad state of affairs, but that's part of the book, and it's part of what we're having to learn to deal with now. We've heard that when it comes to COVID, right? Mm-hmm, we've seen leaders say stuff like that. Turn your neighbors in. If you see a bunch of cars in their driveway, turn them in.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. Well, and we saw that happen in the book too, with Parsons, I believe it was, and his children, and the children turning their parents in. So yeah.
One of the debates you and I were having was on how to navigate, I don't know, pages and pages and pages. You sent me 7 pages. I've got 5 in front of me. So what I thought is we'll let you kind of hit your highlights that you sent me. Okay. And then as I see correlating points, I will chime in with my take on it. Yeah. And then we'll go from there. And we'll read comments as we go. Matthew Durham, what's up? Matthew Durham. By the way, Matthew Durham, I just had a conversation with Eric Buchanan. We want to get you back on in a couple of weeks to be back on Of, By, and For the People. Matthew said, let's just bring his comment up. See, this is why I don't have my glasses on. Dadgummit. Not to mention, there's names there I can't pronounce.
Would you like me to read it?
Yeah, if you can, because my eyes are.
So Matthew Durham says, not to mention Alexander Solzhenitsyn's revelation in the Gulag Archipelago that 1 in every 3 people were government informers, ensuring that the government didn't actually have to have a direct presence in every home in order to enforce its dictates.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, Matthew, to your point, I think that was where I was trying to remember that statistic that I had read about 1 in every some odd was a government informer. And you're saying it happened in Russia, but I mean, it could probably happen in Germany too.
It did.
Gosh,
Yeah, it did.
So.
Well, why don't you start? You go, because I've got a bunch of stuff that I want to chime into. Here in about 20 minutes, we're going to get Monica Perez to join us. Let's see what we can knock out.
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things I had just said was, about the children turning their parents in, because I had read a story about somebody, I think up in Michigan, her father was running for a Republican position for state legislature, and she did not necessarily agree with what her father, his political leanings were, and believe she went online and, put her voice out there, which is fine. I believe that everybody should, you're entitled to your opinion, but when you're going out there to maliciously, prevent your parents from doing what they're doing, I mean, it's just, to me, that's a little bit, especially if you're a teenager or younger, you haven't paid taxes yet, let's just pay a tax bill first, and then maybe we can have a conversation about those kind of things. But so that was one of the main things that stuck out to me. The other thing too was the 2-minute hate that they had each day, Yeah. And I kind of feel like that's like when I sign on to Twitter in the morning, I'm like, there's the 2-minute hate, because you kind of like, okay, who's the person of today? Who's the person of the next 15 minutes?
What's trending?
Right.
Yeah.
And you get your 2-minute hate that way in the trending. I mean, we saw this with like Nick Sandman of Covington College, I think it was, where he wore the MAGA hat, and people were thinking that he was being, derogatory or saying negative things to the Indian fellow, I believe. And so, that was the man who was of the 2-minute hate for that moment, and then we've seen it copious amounts of time.
What's the hashtag? It's the hashtag, trending hashtag. Let's all hate them for a minute. We'll move on. The other thing I want to chime in about that is, in the book, if you'll notice, that you can't have emotions for the opposite sex. We'll talk about a little bit about that in a minute. You can't really have friendships, right? There's not a lot of emotions, but you're only supposed to save any human emotions for the party, right?
Right.
So that kind of goes along those lines. You're only allowed to have that emotion of hate is really what they got to cultivate, and you only should have that for the party.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess, one of the other things, some of the words, the thought control, the thought police that were there, thought crimes, like those types of things, which are kind of nestled in with the 2-minute hate, and my thoughts on that. But, seeing people get canceled today. So we heard the term unpersoned in 1984. I kind of see that as a reflection of being canceled in today's society, where people can just, President Trump just removed right off, just boop, unpersoned, in the blink of an eye off of Twitter. And it's happened to several other people, Alex Jones. I mean, you name it, it's happened. So, and
now it's happening to even more mainstream people. There's been a purge on social media. And again, there'll be some reoccurring themes. We're doing it to each other as well, right? We're going to unfriend you.
Oh,
I'm going to unfriend you.
Yeah.
And when you unperson somebody, how I hear that, and when I read that, and I hear you say it, is I'm going to unfriend you. We want to get you fired. We want you to stop making a living. Well, behind that person is a family and friends and loved ones. And there's a world that you're having an effect in when you try to cancel them, or when you unperson them. You're removing anything, any emotion about that person. There's no thought to what's behind the person other than their name. And so I think you're right. I think the cancel culture is a lot like that.
Well, you're also removing the space for any sort of dialogue in which that person could explain themselves, or, there's open line of communication, right? I mean, any sort of reason seems to kind of go out the window with these types of things, because there's just no room for conversation any longer.
Yeah. Yeah. And the unfriending part, now when I said it out loud, unfriending and unpersoning sounds kind of, eerily similar as you start. And of course, there's a little more nuance in the book, but I see it happening all around us. So,
yeah, I mean, and you see it happening in families too. I mean, especially with the elections, if you found out that your family member was voting for the wrong party, I mean, I heard it didn't happen to me, but I heard that, Thanksgivings weren't the funnest time of the year. Didn't necessarily want to be sitting at that table.
I actually, and then I'll let you go to the next point. I actually had 2 people reach out and tell me they were unfriending me on purpose until after the election. And then if Joe Biden won, they would friend me back. They haven't friended me back yet. And I try to be as fair-minded as possible, but one of them people know pretty well. So anyway, continue on. I interrupted you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, how about the endless war? They speak of the endless war in 1984. And my thought on that is, in today's society, we see the goalpost shifting, right? Like in so many circumstances where, one day one thing is acceptable, but the next day it's not. And so I feel like this is kind of a way that we're sustaining this endless war between one another by constantly moving the goalpost and what is okay, what is politically correct, what is not politically correct. And it's just kind of sustaining that just
stress,
unsettling feeling. Yeah, stress, between people in today's society. So
yeah, and the war then, in the book, of course, is with Eurasia or East Asia, and you've always been at war with them. That's what they make you say. How long have we been at war with them? Always, and it can change the next day, but it's been always because they erase everything.
Right.
But the war, I like how you're taking it, because the war in the book is with supposedly another nation state, kind of like what we've been used to, right?
Mm-hmm.
The war that we're living now is in our borders. It's with our neighborhoods now and our organizations. And if you don't mind, I'll just throw this in there now. It's one of my points, but I think it's a good place for it. Also, one of the other things in the book is everything became about your thoughts and the party. So everything became about that. So in the world we live in right now, we used to watch sports to get away from reality, right? We went to church to have our own time with our own people. You went to work and there's certain things you didn't talk about, certain things you did talk about. You went to school to learn. Now there's no escape from it. And I feel like that's a main thing. When I listen to this and I look at the world we live in, there's no place I can go now that's a respite from the BS that we have created in the constant war with each other.
Right.
It's everywhere.
You bring up a really good point. I mean, so do you think it's like politics seeping into every faction of our existence? Because that's kind of like what I'm seeing it to be.
Oh yeah, it's politics, but I think people now are changing. I had a friend of mine reach out to me probably a year ago and say, Clint, politics has always been dirty. And, people have always said unkind things. And I get it. Politics is politics is politics. Mm-hmm. But I think politics now is simply a weapon. I think politics now is simply a tool, and it's power, just like the book 1984 we're talking about, that monologue that they had towards the end in the torture scene. It's all about the power, and you don't have power and then create the anarchy. It's not anarchy, what the word he used, but you create anarchy in order to get the power. Uh-huh. You create chaos to get the power. And I think politics now is being wielded as a weapon just to leverage power. And I know it's always kind of been that way, but they're just out in the open about it now.
Right. No.
So I think that's everywhere. I want you to think about this real quick now. We talk about school, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking ideologies. If we're talking about sports, we're talking ideologies. If we talk about church, open my church, close my church, we're talking ideologies. We're talking about diseases. That's the one thing I wrote down. We can't agree on science. You got your experts, I got my experts. You got your preachers, I got my preachers. You got your Christians, I got my Christians. Everything now, there's no touchstone of standards.
No, you're so right. I mean, something so objective as science, a virus that is not even of any human condition at all, it's like we can't, how do politics get into that? Microbiology.
And your buddy Matthew, brought up a good book that I'd like to try to listen to, and I'm going to get the name of it wrong. He might be able to correct us, but it's The Death of the Experts. I can't remember it, but again, we treat our politicians and experts as gods, and they're unquestionable. So I'll go get my own that confirm what I believe. And now I can tell you, you just don't believe in science.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, dude, I've got my scientist right here. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so it's just silly.
And your scientist may just have a PhD in public policy. That's not to, you know, scoff at a PhD in public policy, but I mean, that's not necessarily a scientist per se.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've hijacked it several times. Keep going down your list. I like how this is going.
I think the last one thing that I was going to say, so there's a quote in the book, and I'm not going to sit here and read the entire paragraph, but about history being rewritten. So, you know, about the books, and it's on page 155. I mean, it might be a good one thing to read if.
What's the part where they say the books were burned, the books were rewritten, the statues were removed, things were erased, so no one could remember if there was anybody happy. They didn't know if anybody was happy before them because there was nothing there to look at or read about.
Right. And so, I mean, I think we're seeing that happen with the removal of statues. I mean, like, we're literally seeing that happen, right? But a guy that I follow, James Lindsay, he is he has a PhD in math, but he's written a book, Cynical Theories. Anyways, maybe not that big of a deal, but he had posted a video of Fauci, Dr. Fauci, and I hope this doesn't get you like demonetized or whatever they say. They got
to monetize me first, so go ahead.
Okay. You know, he had put something out about Fauci, and it was a video clip of Fauci talking in March of 2020 saying that masks were useless.
Yep. And
then Facebook flagged it because he posted this a few months ago, and now, you know, we've got not one mask but 3 masks, that whole thing now. And Facebook flagged it when he put it up, when in reality it was a clip from Fauci from 2020, you know. And so you're seeing history be rewritten in that sense, where you can't even put up a historical piece of evidence that happened without it being flagged or removed.
Well, I wrote it down about this, and that is where we come up, because we were trying to draw parallels. Again, we know we're not living under 1984 dictates now, but we're trying to draw the similarities. At least that's why I read the book or listened to it again. That's where you come up with, I think, the fact checkers now, right? Not only are we editing definitions, we talked about this, and this will maybe segue into the words part of this, you know, the definitions that were used, but not only are we fact checking, and you got to add context. So if Fauci says something, it's not true, you got to add context. If somebody else said something, it's just considered false, right? But we're editing things, we're removing things. So we're a generation away, or 2 at the most, for people that are going to be born in the next 20 years. There's going to be some things that they may just not know ever happened, or know how people reacted to certain things. And if we're going to allow fact checkers to add context, and if we're going to stand by and let them change that up, there's problems. One of the problems we have is last year in real time, in October, September, something like that, when they were doing the hearings for the Supreme Court Justice Barrett, she used the term sexual preference. Well, in real time, within a couple of days or less, the Websters had gone online and changed the definition of sexual preference to something that was offensive. Now, it wasn't that way before, but they got enough pushback from people saying how offensive it was. Now, it doesn't matter that all the YouTube videos went up of collage of left people or right people, Republicans, Democrats, using that term for the last 10 years, even just the week before. They changed the definition of racism in real time last year after they got enough emails. So we're seeing things change in real time, and it's not because there's thought and debate about it. It's because we see pressure. And so we're seeing that right now.
No, absolutely.
We're seeing things change in front of us. So if you're born today and you Google it 10 years from now, you're not going to know the definition is when we had it. And again, I don't mind definitions changing. I mind the absence of debate about the word.
Exactly. Like how things can just happen overnight with no formal discussion about what's going on, you know?
Right.
Yes. So I agree with that. And, you know, I don't know what your thoughts are on big tech and how that kind of plays into the whole theme of 1984. But, you know, how would you view big tech versus government? And
no, you don't get to start asking me questions and get off not answering questions. That's not how this works, ma'am. No, I think big tech plays into it. I think big tech's part of, a lot of people look at it as the government. Well, now in the world we live in, I think the line the lines between big tech and government are getting more and more blurred. And when we have people in power, Republican or Democrat, that support the censorship or the fact checking of big tech when it favors us, but we hate it when it's against us, our hypocrisy is what's going to be our downfall. If we fall, I don't think it's going to be people, the government trying to do things. I think it's going to be our willingness to keep our own party in check. Mm-hmm. It's not the silence of good people on the other team that will hurt your team. It's the silence of good people on your own team.
Yeah,
that hurt. This is what social media is now. It's the tennis match of headlines and I told you so's and fact checkers, right? Mm-hmm. I'll show you mine, you show me yours.
Yeah,
but that doesn't solve anything.
And like you said, hypocrisy, there's so much of that going on today. I mean, to your point, you just mentioned about showing video clips of people saying the sexual preference. There was one out there of fight like hell. Like we heard so many people on the left-hand side using that term fight like hell.
Oh, absolutely.
But that was one of the ones that they extracted from Trump when he went for the march, and gave a speech up there, that was one of those, tenets that he used that they said led to what happened at the Capitol.
Well, he goes, that's my whole point. Here's the issue I have with hypocrisy, though. I'm okay with holding Trump accountable for stupid things he said. He said some hateful stuff. He said some stuff I didn't agree with, but we're not known as just the evil we've all done. In other words, Clint is more than the sum total of all the bad stuff he's done. Right. If you were to take a collage of all the stupid and evil things that I've said or done over the last 53 years, I'd have no friends because I've done a lot of dumb things. I've said a lot of stuff I either regret or could be taken out of context. But it's disingenuous, in my opinion, for any party or person to look at the other person or other party and say they are only the bad.
Yes.
I said this on a podcast the other day. I like the fact that Obama acted a little more presidential.
Oh,
I didn't
100%.
If Trump had a little bit of that in him, it would have been so much easier to support the guy, but he was brass and he was an asshole sometimes. And I didn't like it. Yeah. Hey, let me read this because we're about to have Monica Perez join us. You're going to have to read it again, or I have to get my glasses back.
Oh, yes. Matthew Durham said, seconding Alexandra's recommendation for cynical theories. It isn't super easy to read because it gets into philosophy stuff, but it is does a pretty good job of tracing many of the ideas through history that led us to the death of the expert, as well as, and then ... So.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad here. As well as many of the other failures of, quote, my tribe, the political left. He's calling himself a lefty. All right. Hey, let's take a little bit of a hiatus. Before we leave, I want to talk about the words and definitions, and I want to talk about the ministries. Okay.
Yes.
But we're going to bring a guest in right now for a few minutes and get her take on the book, 1984. And I now become the third smartest person on this broadcast. In 3, 2, 1. What's up, Monica Perez?
Hey guys, I hate to crash your party. It's been so great just being a fly on the wall.
No, we appreciate it. And let me see if I can fix now don't get dizzy, everybody.
Messed up.
It's okay. Hold on. No, let's see.
My dog is
is that okay? Does that look okay?
Yes.
May I just say one thing? I feel like I'm meeting a super famous person. Hi, Monica.
Oh my gosh,
I listen to your podcast every night.
You're so awesome. I feel like any friend of Clint's, thinks I'm famous because he's like, it's Monica Perez, and he will do that with his dog.
Speaking of dogs, you got a dog. Is he crashing your party?
Oh my gosh, he's so annoying. What? Wrong way. He's super annoying. But he pushes this dumb table, which my camera's on, and it must be dinner time.
Well, anyway. You can go feed him unless you want to talk about 1984 real quick.
No, I've been listening. I didn't want to crash too soon, but I've been listening. I am going to send out an alert to come get Samson.
Oh, you're sending it to family members. All right.
Yes, I've just put out an Amber Alert.
Well,
Get this dog out of here.
with technology, if either one of you click out, just click back in and we'll get you started. And the only reason I'm in this format, if anybody gives me grief, is just so I can see both people correct on my screen, because beforehand I couldn't hardly see either one of them once we had 3 people join. So this makes it easier for me. All right. So Monica, if you've been listening, you know what we've been talking about. We were about to go into the definitions of words in the book and how I can see some parallels now. But before we go down that road, do you like the book 1984? Do you think there are parallels? Are you one of those people that thinks, it's poo-poo, it's no big deal? What do you think?
I definitely think there are parallels. I've always thought that. I was raised in a very anti-communist household, so that was the kind of thing I was raised on. I remember being told when I was young,
we were watching, and then we blew up. That has never, I'll say this right now. Yep. That has never happened in the broadcast. And I've done 400 something podcasts. I've never had that happen. With
3 people, I feel like I ruined it.
No, I've done it with 4 and 5 people. I think it's our topic. I think Big Brother's watching and they blew us out. Alexandra, can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. So Monica, and now we lost Monica.
I'm here. I just feel like if I use a crappier camera, it won't stress out your system.
It's not my system. Listen, I'm in good old Tennessee. My system's fine. You worry about that California system you got out there.
Well, I just outed George Orwell as a propagandist for the British Ministry of Truth at the time he wrote this book. So I don't know if anybody else's research came up with that.
I did. Yeah, I saw that. So he was actually, if I'm not mistaken, they were using him to counteract against Hitler's propaganda machine.
His was
or was it after that?
I think it was I mean, it must have been during that a little bit, but what I came up with was that he was doing the anti-communist stuff, but as a social democrat. So I find that really interesting, because what Cecil Rhodes wanted to do was bring British-style social democracy to the entire world. And people think of that as like halfway to communism, but it really, like in their mind, I don't think it was. And then one thing that he was doing besides the anti-communist stuff, which was putting down a lot of grassroots movements, people who wanted to kind of, I respect people's rights to have their own culture. And I think, I don't want to interfere with other people's sovereignty, but this was intentionally done to make other countries have the political system that was good for the British. And the only other thing I'll say about that is he came up with Orwell's list, which I'm sure you stumbled upon, which is him outing people that he knew personally as what he thought were kind of dangerously influential communist sympathisers.
No, I didn't.
Katharine Hepburn was. You didn't see that one?
Mm-mm.
That Katharine Hepburn was on his list, and a lot of other people. But that's reasonable. If they're communists, there's no reason to keep that secret. But it's funny because really the information research department was the Ministry of Truth. It created fake news, it created propaganda, it rewrote history, and that is what he talked about with the Ministry of Truth.
Well, and so that's a nice lead in. We can either go down the definition of words trail, or let's go with the ministries real quick. I'll throw that out there. So there was the Ministry of Love, Plenty, Peace, and Truth. So the reason I picked out the truth one as a place for us to start is because, and I was talking to Alexandra, I get your name wrong. It takes me 3 times to say your name every time.
Do you go by Sasha ever, or any little short form?
Alex occasionally.
Alex.
But yeah.
I may just call you A or something because my simple brain.
Miss A.
But so the Ministry of Truth, I think it was in the last few months, oh, yeah. Closed caption has its work cut out for it. Thank you, Cliff. I appreciate that. Ministry of Truth. Stevie Wonder came out within the last couple of months. And then some point in time last year, Representative Barbara Lee and Cory Booker both came out and said that they would support a truth commission that was kind of set up by the government to dictate and make sure that things that were going out were actually the truth. And I don't know how you can read these type of suggestions and not see the parallel between what we're doing right now. Anybody want to chime in on that?
I want Alex to take the lead. She's done her homework, and I really want to hear what she has to say.
No, I mean, again, I think Clint, you and I were talking about this beforehand, but it's so subjective, right? Like who actually determines what is true, what is the truth, and so when you're thinking about setting up something like that, it's asinine because it's so subjective, right?
Well, yeah, and we go, and I think that is my jumping off point. I kind of knew where that was going. My jumping off point is the definition of words. I mean, words now, Monica, we had talked a little bit about this before you came on. The definitions are changing right in front of us. But, I've got this definition right now. You can Google it. Here it is. It's the glossary and definitions from the book 1984. So when you have the Ministry of Peace, it's actually about war. When you have the Ministry of Plenty, it's actually about, they're handling other stuff. The Ministry of Truth is about rewriting history. And there's newspeak and doublethink. We are in that place a little bit right now. We can't even agree on terms.
I just cited that, or somebody sent it to me and I read it that on the air, that the vaccination, the definition of vaccination has been changed. It was a conventional vaccination like Johnson & Johnson is coming out with, or Sputnik 5, where they can deliver a kind of dead or almost dead or low viral load with an adjuvant. And that's how your body gets used to a new virus. They had to add into that what really is gene therapy, which is where a viral vector or some other way for a piece of genetic material to enter your body and do something totally different from what a traditional vaccination was, because they want to call the Moderna thing and the Pfizer thing vaccinations, but they're not. They're gene therapy. So They just, instead of changing the rules, instead of having approvals and stuff, they change the definition, which is kind of funny. It's almost like hollowing out a word, putting something else in there, and then everything that word seemed to be in a package of gets hijacked.
Well, and I'm going to throw this out there because if we have people saying stuff, Laura Ramsey says, "Hey, Monica." Thank you, Laura, for jumping in. Well, I just had a conversation with Eric Buchanan about this before we came on, and I started doing the video. If we're having a debate on something, right? If we're all talking about ideas and then we can't even agree on the definitions of terms, those ideas will go unchallenged. We're hiding behind these little facade of conversations about what a word means. And in reality, back in the background, it's like bombs are going off in our world. And we're like, we should be talking about the bombs and not about the stupid word that we should all know the definition of. I wanted to get your take on this, Monica, but JJ just chimed in. He's always good. And now, Alex, can you read that, Alexandra? Look at me say your name right the first time.
The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate the unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is
and here we go, which is the true
country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. That reminds me of another vaccine thing, is that they are not showing us, but evidently it's true, that behind the scenes, from storage, distribution to transportation, is actually getting done with the help of a large part of it is like the help of the military and that kind of thing. So they do change the a lot of this stuff is facade, and I feel like that is part of the Ministry of Truth. And another big thing I don't want to miss about the Ministry of Truth was that part of it, this was part of the rewriting history stuff, memory holing, and disappeared persons, whatever. They said the reason they would rewrite history, like if a prominent person made a mistake in a prediction or something, they would rewrite it because they wanted to give this impression that the state was all powerful. And boy, I hadn't thought about that in a long time. And that is so what the propaganda is for right now, I think. Don't you feel like it's just overwhelming? I mean, I'm really ready to give up. And I don't understand why the only hope is that they literally need 24/7 of propaganda.
Well, Monica, we know, though, your only hope is that you is Trump for you. We don't believe that, but we know you do.
Trust the plan, man. Trust the plan.
Well, so we were
out.
talking about this before we came on, and the memory hole in the book is very symbolic. That's where they get rid of you. That's where they get rid of the history. It's just gone. It's evaporated. In my world now, if you take the changing of definitions and words and erasing history now, right? And let's say you screenshot it or you reference it. Well, they can deplatform you, right? So what happens if you start your own platform? They'll just take your platform down. So in a way, they are in I think they're in the beginning phases of finding a way to technically memory hole everything they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And they put it all on the internet, and then they can take it away. So just now I was Googling, I remember I called it the day the internet died was February 14th, 2018, after the Parkland thing, because what I would always do is I would go to DuckDuckGo or whatever, and I would Google, like today, I Googled Texas storm or Texas power outage, PSYOP, psychological operation. Clearly there's something up. And I haven't done that in a really long time because for 3 years now, for 3 years now, that doesn't work anymore. So they got us to put all our information there, and now used to be everybody could just chime in and say, oh, I figured it out. I have this piece of information. And they did that to get us to trust that system. And now it's completely gone. You can't even do the research. They memory hole it just by suppressing the search.
Interesting. Even on DuckDuckGo?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I know. I was annoyed by that. And I'm wondering if there is a search engine out there, but like who even is bothering to post stuff anymore? That I used to do real deep dives on, like cracking the code for MH370 and Miriam Carey and the Boston Marathon bombing. I don't even do it anymore because A, I can't find the information, and B, what's the point? I got taken down from WordPress for stuff like that.
But Alexandra, we talked about this, how scared we are. I mean, you're a professional. Mm-hmm. And we none of us want to lose business based off just wanting to have conversations. But now I think we kind of run the gamut of, we try to navigate it of, am I saying the right words? Am I doing the right thing? Have I made somebody mad? Is this going to cost me? Am I going to get unfriended? Am I going to become unpersoned? The beginning parts, it's a real fear that I know you have, because between the three of us, you actually make a living doing something other than talking on a microphone. Seriously.
Yeah. I mean, selling houses. Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I use social media as a big platform for, marketing myself. So it's very important to me that I keep my mouth shut. Now, I will say I do have an Instagram page that is privately set, and I've got a handful of followers on there that I know personally that I feel okay with just exposing my political beliefs and my beliefs in nature. But yeah, I mean, out there for the world to see, no, I mean, it's a scary time for sure.
And Monica, the best, this better than anybody though. If I want to figure out, if I'm doing something, and I want to figure out how to affect someone's life, I just follow them for 3-4 days or a week, and I figure out what their habits are when they leave the house, when they go that, stalking stuff. But then you can interrupt their life and do it in a place where you can have least collateral damage to yourself. I kind of feel that's what big tech is doing to us. They've figured out our habits. They've watched us. They go, okay, this is what they like to do. Bam, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. It's anonymous. They dox you, they take you down. And it's a shame that you can't, like you're saying, for your business, you need to make sure that your impact as a citizen is minimized. And that's what I think is this soft fascism that's descending on the world through the World Economic Forum, through the Great Reset, where they're just making sure that business controls everything. It comes from Crisis of Democracy from Zbigniew Brzezinski, where they just want to make sure that the institutions run everything so that you can't exist outside the institution and you have no say in the institution, and you can't say anything even in the democratic process for fear of being alienated by the institution. And if the institution is Twitter or Remax or the University of Houston or whatever, that's what the institution is, and you can't risk it. Otherwise you get canceled.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
And I'm more worried about like fascism between people, like one-on-one fascism versus the government. I'm not necessarily worried about the government, but I'm worried about word of mouth and what my sphere knows of me and thinks of me. You know, that's what's going to destroy a person's business.
And that's the true believer problem. That I live in LA now, and when the masks started coming down and everything, I was like, just broadcasting. Clearly, I didn't disobey the rules. I'm not highly confrontational, but I would, every time I was at the grocery store, I was like, hey, do you know anybody who's sick? Do you know anybody who died, wasn't put on a ventilator? Like, what is your experience with this thing? Do you think it's worth the economic devastation that's happening here? Just chit chat. And a lot of people would pick up on it, especially, and this, I've always noticed this about truth and like reality. People who are more blue collar are so much more like rational and observant than the people who like I went to graduate school with, who are just like, what are you talking about? Everything's fine. I'm making money hand over fist. What could be wrong with this system? It's like, well, I know you cannot actually afford to look at this, but outside of those interactions, when I would like go to whatever the institutions, the schools, the other parents and stuff, the problem wasn't this damn governor who makes us all wear a mask. People were just like, oh my gosh, isn't this disease horrible? Whatever. And I'm like, well, do you know now people are really sick, but like for the past 8 months, people haven't been. And that's the problem. It's the true believers. Like we would be able to push back on these rules. And that was the thing about the Ministry of Truth, saying they just want the state to feel all powerful and all knowing. And they did that. And then the people didn't really push back in any kind of timely fashion. And so we're our own tyrants out here.
Well, we saw in some communities, and we talked about this a little earlier, where they were saying, Thanksgiving, if you see a bunch of people in your neighbors, feel free to call somebody. Don't let that happen. And my problem comes from my problem doesn't come from what's going on as much. I mean, I have a problem with a lot of stuff going on, and I'm about to pull some comments up here in just a second. But my problem comes more from them as in people who want to just stifle the conversation, who just want us to not talk about it. Monica, don't ask questions about the COVID. Clint, don't ask questions about this. Y'all just stop talking about all this stuff. And I'm not telling you you're not right in your conclusions. I'm saying, how come we can't have the conversation to get to that conclusion ourselves? Why do I have to take somebody's word for it? If you've got a conclusion that you think you're right about, let's have a conversation, and I might end up at the same place you are. But when you tell me that I just got to shut up or label I'm a this or I'm a that, then I think you're full of shit, and I'm probably not going to be too happy about it. Pardon my language. Look at me speaking. I've changed the definitions of that word, though, so that's not a bad word anymore. Hey, real quick.
I'm a vulgarian, but I cannot stand hearing all the vulgarity. Like I was listening to Fox News and they quoted somebody. I mean, they just will say, I think I read The Guardian the other day, and they had a quote of somebody using the F word. The F word.
And for Monica to get offended by it is pretty bad.
There's a time and place for everything.
You're going to be careful. New York's going to come out of you.
Brooklyn's
going to come out in you. Hey, let's post a few comments. And Monica, in a little bit, before you leave, though, I want to get your take on two things. One, Alexandra brought up was about we're always at war now. And in the book, they always had to have a war. And I know that's a big deal with you. And then in a minute, I also want to talk about that apologies just don't work. Even if you're wrong, if you say something wrong and you apologize, they're still coming after you. So JJ said, lots of folks seriously believe we still need to lock down and mask up harder with even more compliance. They think COVID-19 is still because we have not done that. They think it's still around because we've not done that. That's true.
And that's going to keep going even with the vaccinations, by the way.
Biden's already said that.
They won't mandate it. They won't mandate the vaccination because they need anti-vaxxers in order to justify the same exact policies. But Eric made a point that I want to pick up on.
Whoa, look at her. All right.
So one of the biggest future conflicts will be technocratic elites versus those who believe in common sense. And it's funny because yesterday I did a podcast as a guest on Around the Empire, and it has not been published yet. So I'm certain that Eric didn't hear me say it, and he may, when he does, if he were to hear it, think
he's been playing golf all week on vacation. He's not heard a word.
Oh, I'm sure he doesn't listen to my podcast, but
No,
I'm just saying it's funny because it's weird because I know this thing is in the can, and the bonus question that she put out for her patrons was asking me, what do I think the future holds? And that's exactly what I said. I said, they are already preparing for the tunnel people, which is a very cute thing that I made up. And I really think it should be called the Outlanders, because I think the tunnel people are going to have a hard time raising chickens in the tunnels. We need to feed some
real quick,
land.
can Alexandra and I, can we come to your tunnel?
You can come to the tunnel. I was going to be the voice of the tunnel, but I decided to be the librarian of the tunnel instead, because I feel like even though I would like the job of being good morning tunnel people, I think I'll have more value with the books. But I think there's going to be a tunnel Trump. I think we're going to see that emerging. But this idea of the technocrats versus the tunnel people, I absolutely think is going to be the conflict of the future. The 21st century conflicts I've always thought was Western secular humanism against like Islam and religion, and the synthesis would be an enforced morality, which I think COVID is bringing us. But after that, maybe 22nd century or even the end of the 21st century, the dialectic, the big conflict, the war, and maybe we're kind of seeing the foreshadowing of that with the kind of Q Trump people who won't give up, and the establishment people, but it's going to be the technocratic overlords and the tunnel people who won't have it. It's going to be like a vaccine apartheid, maybe that kind of a, that's how it's
throwing a bunch of stuff together. I got to be honest with you. It's like a big puzzle piece of the future.
Well, 1984 was that, right? Was it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Didn't 1984 just look forward based on what was happening right then and there? And he was just saying, look, I can see it happening. This is the shape that this is taking. You're not seeing the details yet, but he knew because he was behind the scenes. He worked for the Ministry of Truth.
Alexandra, do you want to say something? I saw you.
Yeah, I was just going to ask what your both thoughts are on the proles. So, I've heard a lot of people refer to the proles as like the deplorables of today, but I'm not necessarily entirely sure that that's the case, because in the book, the proles seem to just kind of be okay with the way that things were. And I don't take the deplorables as people that are just okay and humdrum with what's going on today. So thoughts on what the deplorables stand for in today's societies means.
Yeah, I definitely think the proles are the people who get the bread in circuses. I absolutely am going to start using prole feed to describe the entertainment, Netflix and stuff, because I've gotten to the point where
Easy.
I watch it. I buy it. I own it. But I'm a prole. But it's almost like the prole feed. I know it was a subset of the Ministry of Truth, but as if it all merged together. But it does point out something that I've also noticed is that there's different tiers for the propaganda. But the prole feed is just all the sex and sports and crime stories. I feel so bad because I'm like so hooked on Forensic Files. And it's merged with propaganda. So Forensic Files is propaganda for the state because they came out with all this stuff like the forensics is so not the science that they act like it is. It's really weird. So that is propaganda, but everything now is propaganda, everything, even the prole feed.
Well, see, and to me, when I read the proles part of it, or as I listened to the book again, if you're an intellectual, if you're somebody that could think for yourself, it was almost like the whack-a-mole game. Because if you thought for yourself, your head would stick up and they would notice you, and that's when they extracted you. You were gone from that. If you weren't part of the inner circle, you weren't allowed, you didn't get the special treatment. And so they kind of had to and they knew their place. So they became happy with being poor. Sometimes there was food, sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes there was clothes, sometimes there wasn't. If there was bombs, you're the ones that got blown up. I mean, it just seemed to me to be the common man. And if you were to be a deplorable, because I think deplorables do say stuff now. So if you were to stick up and say something, at least in the book, I think that's when they came along and just whack-a-moled you. You were just kind of gone. That's an official whack-a-mole move right there. All right, Matthew Durham chimed in. Let's agree. Agreed, never apologize to a mob of people who don't know you. Apologize to your friends and family when appropriate, full stop. I agree with that. My issue comes from in the book when they're torturing Winston at the end. He actually said, it doesn't matter if you apologize. It doesn't matter if you say what we want you to say. You have to believe it. And even then, just know death will come. I mean, he told him point blank, you can believe it may prolong it a little bit. You just don't know when it's going to happen. And now I see people getting in trouble and they'll come out and say, you know, I'm really sorry I said that 5 years ago, or I shouldn't have said that last week. And people are still like, nope, you still got to be fired. You can't host the Emmys. You are done with whatever life you thought you had. Your apology does not work. So apologies just don't work. That's not what they're after. And I think sometimes we feel if we go, well, I'm sorry, they don't care if you're sorry. They don't care if you're a human being. You are the worst of everything, of all your bad. Epidemiologists don't even consider the cost of the huge sweeping policies they propose. No, they don't. I don't think a lot of experts doing that. Do you agree with that, Monica?
I actually think it goes to the other thing that I wanted to comment on. I think they believe their own nonsense. Like I was saying, even, you know, the elites are like, it's all working for me. It's what my sister coined, the ethical glass ceiling. They just can't think beyond that. And they believe that they're doing good because believing they're doing good helps them accomplish what they're told to accomplish. So they are true believers. And I think that that's what you were saying. Like people have to be true believers. And maybe that's what all this bend the knee, wear the mask. I forget. I think a military guy I was listening to called it like perform a rendition. I can't remember what it's called, but where you just have to do a ritual thing that makes it clear that maybe, you know, you probably believe it, but even if you don't believe it, at least you submit.
Well, they did that in 1984 with the 2-minute hate, right? You know, they had to perform all the, you know,
they have that now. They have rage rooms and scream rooms. Have you seen that?
Mm-mm. Yeah. Is that on university campuses? Are those like safe
and businesses? There's some businesses too, I think.
And I think there are paid places you can go in Japan where you can go in and break stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We used to call those temper tantrums, and we used to get spankings for that. So, well, okay, yeah, and there was something I was going to bring up because you had said something really good. Oh, so you're saying that they don't even believe what they're saying, right? They're saying it. So, like, is that what you were saying?
Stop thinking.
Yeah. Well, a little bit of a version of that. If I say something, but I really don't believe it, but I have to say it because I have a team, I have to, you know, toe the party line, big brother, right? Is when we see mayors and governors saying everybody's got to lock down except for me. I can go to restaurants and go to the gym. I can travel. Or when you see Fauci wear a mask on the mound when there's no one around, and then he goes sits in the stands when there's not a camera on him next to two people, and he takes his mask off. And I'm not pointing out the hypocrisy just to point out the hypocrisy. I'm saying if we can't all agree that we should question that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or libertarian, if we can't look at that as a deplorable people or the proles and go, hey, that's not right, is it? If we can't do that, then what happens is Monica becomes the lone voice, and all they have to do is whack-a-mole her. And now me and Alexandra just sit down and go, I'm going to shut up and eat my bread and just try to make a living. I'm not going to. Do you see what they did to Monica?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I had to use you, Monica, as the example.
That's a good point. They isolate, and then it's easy to weed it out, and then it's an example to the others.
Yeah, you know, if me and Alexandra on one side or either side of you, and they go, "Who said that?" and me and her both go, "You're totally screwed." Eric, deplorables are the ones who don't automatically agree with the technocrats, which include political as well as business and science. Yeah, and I think that goes back just to the common sense thing. One of the things that frustrates me is when we originally read, and you just read this for the first time, but if you would have read this 20 or 30 years ago, you would have been like 2. But if you would have read this like I did back in the 80s, early 80s, it's fiction. It's not supposed to be this close to reality. It laughable. It was satire. People used it and go, oh man, whew, that would be crazy. That's science fiction. And now we're like, we're gonna have a ministry of what, a truth commission?
Definitely are. But to Eric's point, I want to respond to that one, and the deplorable thing to Alexandra's point is that what annoys me is that if Ron Paul had been leading the charge, you would have a person of integrity and faithfulness and a voting record and ideology and can cite the Constitution and everything. And that is what was happening. So this is why I don't believe in Trump, is that they then took all these instincts and all these, the last gasp of defending the American experiment, which would not die. I mean, it would not die. Ron Paul was galvanizing a whole nother generation of people who read the Constitution and believed in free enterprise. So I think they took the elements of it that they could sever from the ideology, like just resistance perhaps, and then they attached it to somebody who was like a loudmouth, let's say, for lack of a better word, like Trump. So like my father we used to watch All in the Family, and he's like, Archie Bunker said, like Archie Bunker had, I don't know if he complained about taxes or he like believed I can't remember what his politics were, but my father liked his politics. And then he was just a racist dope. And my father's like, why do they have the racist dope, the guy who knows like labor unions are no good or something like that? And I was like, well, obviously they do that to put it like everybody in a basket.
Well,
and
in marketing, we call that by association. I mean, in marketing, I want to put your product near the superstar. So everybody goes, oh, Pepsi's awesome. Or, you know, that's what it is.
I think that's what Trump,
with you.
That's why I'm annoyed with the whole Trump phenomenon, is that I feel like they made the face of the deplorables, the voice of the deplorables, somebody who was actually could made himself look deplorable sometimes.
Alexandra, I see you shaking your head. Do you want to say something, or do you want me?
Oh no, I'm just agreeing. I'm just agreeing. I mean, he did make himself look deplorable on numerous occasions.
and that for me too. But it's the Trump that, you know, I know it's a little controversial, but I just it really.
But I blame us for that. And here's why I blame us a little. Well, because we've had years and years to stand up to the media. We've had years and years to stand up to whoever we didn't like at the moment. We've had years and years to push back and to say the stuff we've been saying now. Rand Paul's been around for a while. His dad's been around forever. I mean, we've had years and years to stand up with other people and say, whoa, you can't talk about people like that. But we didn't do it.
Well, see,
but
you were, but the rest of us proles weren't.
They suppressed it.
I think one of the things, and I could be wrong because I'm not that well versed in politics, but from what I can see is the left, the Democrats stick together, regardless of how progressive the idea is. The party by and large sticks together, whereas the Republicans kind of start to partition themselves off, you know, and we saw that happen with Trump.
All right, here we go. 2 comments, and then I got to get to this last point and Monica, can you hang out with us for a few more minutes before we?
Yeah, sure. If you want me to, I hate to hijack the show.
Are you kidding me? We're both loving this. So JJ said 1984 is
I'm starstruck.
Retroactive documentary, which I kind of agree with. All right, so I'll get to my point in a second, but we'll go with Eric Buchanan's comment. So if Trump was not a good choice, who do the people who support freedom, the Constitution, the American experiment turn to? What choice do we have? Monica, take a breath.
Absolutely. It was Ron Paul. And I was on conservative talk radio for 8.5 years. People would call and say that he had a dangerous foreign policy, which was absolutely kooky. And the reason that Ron Paul was not accepted is that Jeff Zucker did not push him. Jeff Zucker put Trump up there. He taught him on The Apprentice how to be a TV star. He made him into the boss. And then he told liberals that if you want to quake in your boots some, you better hope that Trump gets nowhere near the White House if you don't want to quake in your boots. So we were manipulated by the media into focusing on Trump. It looked like the Democrats were hating him, but what they were giving him was a lot of press, whereas Ron Paul was ignored by the left and the right. And he was absolutely a stalwart defender of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Christian concept of just war.
Okay, here we go. One more comment right here. JJ says, Clint, you can't blame generations and generations of government-educated people. I agree with that to the point of, at some point, so if you go back far enough into the past, there was a tipping point where the government had more control, where the people had more control of the education than the government, right? Then at some point in time in history, there's a tipping point where the government had more control. Wherever that tipping point is, the responsibility of giving that power to the government, I don't know if it's in 75, 86, 61, 1932. I don't know when the tipping point was. At some point, we, the people, said, hey, take this from us and you guys handle it. And at that point, we were just slowly given over control. And now we are, if you send your kids to public schools, a lot of them now are just feeding their brains. And there's all kinds of articles. Just Google it. So I agree with what you're saying, but at some point it is ours.
Yeah, but that plays into two problems. One is that if that's the case, then we are no longer capable of self-governance and all the technocratic totalitarians are right. And on the other hand, if that, or a flip side of that is that then you don't have free will. Do we have free will? Are we capable of resisting? I mean,
yes,
we should be. And this is where I think we went wrong, is that we thought people had that lesser of two evils thing. And that's just,
it's always a lesser of two
cowardly
evils.
And compromising.
And that's what I agree with you. I'm just saying now our lesser of two evils are just two evils, really bad.
They were always two evils. What you have to do is have the courage to never support evil, even if it means the world goes to hell, because when you're facing St. Peter, you can hold your head held high. And look, the world went to hell anyway, because compromise is not the answer.
Alexandra wants to say something, but she's still got to sell houses. So feel free to comment.
What?
Man.
Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't know what your all thoughts are, but, I think maybe when the government social programs started to really become a thing, people became soft and they just started to rely on the government for more and more. I mean, my grandfather would have died before he was, put out his hand for a government dollar. I mean, he didn't finish high school. He went to war. He came back. He built a business. He wasn't about to take a government handout. And I know that's easier said. For me, it might be easy to sit here and say, because I don't have to have the government for money per se. There's a lot of people out there that are struggling. I understand that. But I think by the same token, we've set up so many different programs now that we've just made a generation after generation of soft people who, don't do what they need to. I mean, I don't know.
A lot of those programs require that your dad move out of the house. If that wasn't subversive, that is the most regressive, racist policy there ever was. And nobody ever stands to account for that. If that's not intentional, that's not unintended consequences. Those are the intentions, because look what happens. They have the problems now forever.
Well, the assault on the family, whether the family is white, black, green, purple, or yellow, I think is kind of an easily to prove thing. I think there is an assault on the family, but I think one of the, two things can be true at the same time. Of course, what you're both saying is true. On the flip side, there is an age bracket right now between just being born and, let's say, 20 or 18 or 15 or 30, whatever it is, that had nothing to do with being brought into a world where their family was dependent on this system. They don't know any different. So to me, those are the ones that are the innocent they're getting played right now and used as tools, because they don't understand whether you're white, black, green, or yellow, that we let systems get built to actually enslave and imprison our minds. Again, no matter what color, we allowed those systems to be built around them. And now you got a 15-year-old that knows no better, or 25-year-old that doesn't understand there's options.
So I feel like 1984 was a warning. But this guy, what he was working for the Ministry of Truth for England, and maybe they meant it to be a warning against communism, but maybe warnings are just roadmaps, and there's no hope, because I feel like.
Did you just say there's no hope?
Like what you're saying, if what you're saying is true, if once this cycle starts, people are incapable of thinking themselves out of the paper bag, they can't.
Unless people like us at our age, 40 plus, are strong enough to take control back and say, and I'm not talking about I'm talking about control back through the debating process. I think unless we have the ability and the wherewithal to take some control back and impose our will on stuff, I think that the 15-year-old can't do it right now.
But I think that's what the whole January 6th thing was all about. It was just about it was about redirecting that energy.
She is determined to get you fired, Alexandra. I
shoot.
just want you to know right now. Hey, let's read some
You
comments.
put us on Facebook. We should have been broadcasting live from the tunnel. Come on.
Eric, this is so Tom, this is to you, this is to Eric. Eric, if you're listening, Eric, the Constitution Party has existed for decades. If you're waiting for a foe or Hannity to tell you who to vote for, it is a moot point. Yeah, I think, and I just in Eric's defense, if Eric's not watching, Eric is a libertarian. I have a strange feeling that when you start talking with Eric about the Constitution, that would be a great conversation. That would be fun.
Listen to Garland. Garland is a member of the Constitution Party, my friend who talks about election integrity. If you want to get thrown off of Facebook, like right now, I'll start telling you.
No, don't. I've listened to your podcast, and I listened to it from like an anonymous thing, so they can't.
Oh, totally.
Who's listening to her? The Monica ladies is sharp. Thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
The public schools were the foundations of tyranny.
Yeah, that was John Dewey from about 100 years ago, and he said you don't want people to think; you want them to just be, high level tech.
And how much easier is it to see than the way the classroom's set up? Where everybody sits in individual seats facing the front. You got one person here, talking to you, not with you. So
and then half of it's in the home. If people were going to start homeschooling, now you've got that pipeline directed
from the government to come directly into your house now.
And they look in your window.
They call them wellness checks. They're called wellness checks. So
where's the hope there, Clint, buddy?
You stop it. Hey,
I think Eric was right. It's going to be the tunnel people versus the techno crap.
Here's one thing I wanted to bring up was, in part of the book, it says they were not interested in the act. They were interested in the thought. They were more interested in the thought than the act, because if they could control the thought, they could control the act. And so the thought to me is in your brain. It's motivation. It's what starts something, right? It's this thought. So I started thinking, my brain went to how the media has covered and I'm not talking about the protest. Stop. Don't even try to go down that road with me. If you're talking about protest, I'm all for protesting. Protesting is great. It's part of our foundation. Yay, protest. Rioting and destroying entrepreneurs' businesses and homes is illegal, tragic, and punishable. It's a criminal offense and horse crap to do. The thing at the Capitol, not good. The thing in the summer, not good. But one was deemed okay because the motivation behind it was accepted. One was deemed not okay because of the quote motivation. So the thought is all that mattered. It wasn't the act.
I think that the only people who did bad stuff on that day, the second day that you're talking about, were agents provocateur.
I know you think that. And that's why you'll be kicked off a platform soon.
I know you. When the chips are down, who's defending your buddy?
Hey, listen. What buddy? What buddy are you talking about?
Yeah, see?
Oh.
See? Yeah. Who did that, Peter? What?
She's protecting you is what she's saying. She's protecting all my friends.
I'm protecting Mr. T. I'm going to call him Tunnel Trump. He is now Tunnel Trump.
That's your new propaganda report merch. Tunnel Trump.
Oh yeah, the boy.
Coffee mugs.
Because I think there's going to be a deep fake guy who runs the resistance, the fake resistance, and it's going to be Tunnel Trump. Like he'll have a voice. Maybe it'll be Trump's real voice. Maybe it'll be a deep fake of Trump.
It'll be fabulous. It'll be the best Trump ever.
I think that on that day, the people who caused trouble actually disrupted the legitimate. I mean, do you have? I don't want to drag Alexandra saying anything like that, but they disrupted the legitimate process that was going to raise some.
I know where you're heading. No. And right now, there's homes to be sold here in the cities. So
all right. I was
going to ask if you were petting your dog. I was going to ask if you were petting the dog.
He got back in the room. It's super annoying.
That's okay. Hey, Alexandra, do you have about 10, 15 minutes to wrap this up with me?
Yeah, I'm gonna duck out.
Hey, real quick, before you duck out, tell everybody how to find the podcast that won't be on after the next few months.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm just pushing my website now. I put it on servers in another country. So I should be able to outrun at least two more rounds of the purges. It's thepropreport.com, short for propaganda report. Thepropreport.com. You can find everything you need there. That's the starter set. It's all free, and we've got a little mini Twitter feed. You can put your headlines and have a conversation. We have meetups, and you have all our podcasts there. Thepropreport.com.
You have YouTube there too? Can you get through YouTube? Are you doing YouTubes anymore?
I hardly really do YouTube anymore, although I am having Ask Adam the Agorist is going to be live Saturday on my YouTube channel, Monica Perez, at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern. So for 1 hour, you can ask, what's agorism? What are freedom cells? What are gray markets? You want nothing to do with this, Clint? And no, Alexandra, if you chime in, you might want to use a different name.
Last question I have, do you still have your Patreon where people can give you, they can support you or not?
Yes, and that's where we have our cocktail parties, our patron saint parties, patreon.com/propaganda report. And if you are in the rabbit hole and you want to see the World Economic Forum, the Council of Foreign Relations, Brookings, and everybody and clips, you can also join rockfin.com/propaganda report. And boy, that will, unfortunately, you will never be able to glue the scales back onto your eyes. So I would wear sunglasses the first couple of times, just ease your way into it. That's
all I heard you say that there's lizard people. Anyway, so I'm just kidding. Hey, everybody, go check out Monica Perez. Can't you all just build your own ISP? Was what Matthew Durham said.
I've been working on the baby steps. But Alexandra, it was an absolute pleasure to meet you. Well, you did. I know you had so much on that 1984. I hope it didn't blow you up. And we'll do maybe next time something that won't get you, relegated to the tunnels.
Depersoned.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Monica.
Bye,
everybody. All right, hey, Alex, here we go. Stay on with me. All right, so that was fun.
That was, yes, I'm starstruck. But I only know of Monica through you. So, to be fair.
Well, I will tell everybody, her podcast is really a good podcast. I'm actually glad she went and put it on some different servers and stuff because we do live in crazy times. That's why
I actually listened to her on iTunes.
She's got really good information. She doesn't mind being challenged. She doesn't mind. I mean, I give her a lot of grief about stuff. So, I give her kudos.
I like the fact that even though she's not a Trump supporter, I never feel offended being a former Trump supporter or Trump supporter, I guess I should still say.
Yeah.
Listening to her podcast, she is able to even keel it. So,
there's another guy, and people don't like him, but his name's Ben Shapiro, and he has gotten on Trump a bunch over the last 4 years. I mean, anybody that says that he is a Trump supporter is just not listening to his podcast. He has hammered Trump, but he does it in a way where, again, one of the themes that we've talked about, and this might be a good place for me to ask you if there's anything we missed, and I'll put the ball in your court. But the one thing that we've talked about is the lack of common sense. And that is the common sense of realizing that good people say and do bad things. Bad people sometimes say things that you kind of go, well, there's some truth in that. No one I have ever met. There are evil people on the planet. They've been on the planet. We can identify.
Richard Ramirez.
Yeah, we can identify people. So, but most of us are, again, I hate to say it, not the sum total of the good or the bad. And that's when I love to hear people have conversations that accept the fact of, I really support Bill Clinton. He did some awful, terrible things, but I still support his policies. And same thing with Obama, same thing with Trump, same thing with Biden. It's okay for you to admit that your person that you support is not a perfect person. That does not have to identify him. Now, that might be a point of dialogue and conversation, but it's good to be honest about it. So tell me real quick, is there any main points that we didn't get to that we can talk about real quick before we wrap it up? Because I don't want to leave this. It's a one-time thing on this book. So I don't want to leave it without something said.
Well, I think to your point of what you were just saying about how, we look at one particular map, just not great action that somebody takes and we let that define them. I think that's really distracting from this notion of individualism. And we were kind of discussing that before we got on the air, that we see in 1984, especially with like Julia per se, is like there's just this stripping away of individualism. And I think Winston was trying with his wanting to recall memories from past, just kind of this reaching into the past to try to cultivate a sense of who he was and what he came from. And Julia just didn't have any of it. She was not interested in that at all. And Winston held this love for her that in the end, and, love is an individual act. It's and he let go of that at the end. So he really let go of his individualism at the very end. Whereas we see with her, she kind of never really had any of it to begin with.
Yeah. The thing about the individualism is, everybody's the same. They have to dress the same. Have sex, but it's only for purpose and useful and utility. There's supposed to be no pleasure in it. You all have to dress the same. And when we see in my mind, when I was listening to the book, the stripping away of who we are as individuals, I see that now where we're supposed to all be even. If you're a girl or boy, you're supposed to all be even. If you're rich, you're supposed to be poor. And if you're poor, we're supposed to be richer. Not because based on effort, it's just be based off that's the way things should be. It feels good that way. And so when we get to this place that we're all the same, then there's nothing that makes you unique to love as a person. There's nothing that makes you unique and special based off effort. We've lost that sense of, they say identity politics, but it's funny because identity politics to me is based off actually stripping away your identity.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I mean,
ironic.
The book ended and it just kind of left me with like a sour taste in my mouth. Like it was sad. It was like a sad love story. I mean,
yeah. He gets whacked.
Yeah, but had he kept his love for her and, didn't throw her under the bus such as he did, then, maybe I would have not felt so sad.
But here's the thing. When I was listening to it, and you might want to reading it and listening are separate things, but I think that addresses the weakness that we all fear we would have. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, I always watch hero movies, and I'm not talking about superheroes, normal people doing outrageously heroic things. And I always want to put myself in that position and go, I would probably do that too. And in reality, I think a lot of us fear that when we are faced with those choices, we would take the same road that Winston did and go, because there's no strength in his identity. If you have some sort of identity and strength built up and confidence, you might stand up to stuff like that. But when you've been stripped your whole life of who you are, then what the hell do I have to lose?
Right. No, a bit easier said than done for sure. Mm-hmm.
Matthew Durham, last comment. Agreed. Equity and diversity are mutually contradictory goals. I agree a lot on that. All right. I think that went pretty good. What do you think?
I think so too. I had a lot of fun. Did you have fun?
I had a blast. Did it go did it go better than you thought? Because I know you were nervous.
Well, I was nervous because, like I said, I take all these notes, but I'm not very good at articulating myself. I can write, till the cows come home, but when it comes to verbally expressing myself, but I was glad that Monica popped in. I think you and I do a pretty good job together. I
think we did a great job together. And the one thing I like about you is when somebody comments with big words that I'm just too simple-minded to read, I just let you read them. And now I'll put my glasses on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. See you, everybody.
Bye, guys.